a while, and I wanted to update you all on my reading goals for this year and how I've been faring. It is, now it's April. We are just 4 months into the start of the year, and I've been doing pretty good with my reading thus far. Some highs, some lows, some lulls, some accomplishments. This is only a portion of the books I have read thus far. This is only the physical books that I've read. There's a few ebooks, and new to me this year, some audiobooks. So I'll review those once we get through this pile here. So I actually will maybe try to go in order. I have my Goodreads open on the side for reference. So let's begin at the beginning. I'm gonna put these off to the side. Don't peek. So, the first book I read this year was Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. So this is like a Regency fae romance. It's very cute, very fun read, not too long. How many pages is it? Let's see. It is, oh, that's the afterword. We won't count that. But 280 pages. So, fairly breezy, fairly straightforward in terms of characters, plot. Nothing too complex, nothing too challenging of a read. But a very cute story. I really like the characterization. I'll read the back just so we can all get an understanding of what it's about. Ever since she was cursed by a fairy, Theodora Eddings has had no sense of fear or embarrassment, an unfortunate condition that leaves her prone to accidental scandal. Dora hopes to be a quiet, sensible wallflower during the London season, but when Elias Wilder, the handsome, peculiar, and utterly ill-mannered Lord Sorcier, discovers her condition, she is instead drawn into dangerous fairy affairs. If her reputation can survive both her curse and her sudden connection with the least liked man in all high society, then she and her family may yet reclaim their normal place in the world. But the longer Dora spends with Elias, the more she begins to suspect that one may indeed fall in love even with only half a soul. So yeah, it's a very, very fun story. I think I saw what do we call them? Like a bookfluencer? Is that a thing? But someone I follow online who is, a reader on Book Talk, on Bookstagram, what have you, really hyped this up and said, like yearning is back. So while I think it didn't quite live up to that for me, I still very much enjoyed it. Actually, a friend and I, we each bought a copy of this together. And then later, when we were hanging out at New Year's, I think we were gonna buddy read it. So she actually read it that day, that night, in fact, and then I read it the next day. So it's a fun one to read with friends. I recommend for that at the very least. Half a Soul. Okay, and then following that, oh, you know what? I forgot to grab it. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. And knowing me, I will not edit that out, so my apologies for the pause. The next one I read was All of Us Villains, and this is by Amanda Foody and Christine Lynn Herman. So this is a YA fantasy, really interesting magic system at play here. So in this, there's a little town. Magic's everywhere. It's normal part, daily life. In this town, though, there's common magic and high magic. And there's these affluent families in this town are part of a curse in which every 20 years a blood moon rises, and that is marks the start of the trials in which a chosen champion from every family must enter these trials to claim the high magic for their family for the next 20 years. And the way they use magic is by putting them in these spell stones that they wear as rings or other jewelry. And they basically can command the magic in those stones to do a particular kind of spell or curse that the ring and stone has been created to do. So there's spell workers in the town who specialize in creating these spell stones. So really interesting world building because it's just sort of a modern, vaguely British setting, but there's magic. And so each of these families, it's like a storied history of these trials, and these families have very particular traditions around these trials. Some families win more often than others. There's a lot of animosity between families and even amongst families, like inside of a family. So it creates really interesting, very different characters. All the characters we follow in this are like late high school, up to like maybe 18 or 19, I think. Yeah, interesting dynamics, interesting family relations. They each have very distinct perspectives, which is really, enjoyable to read. You're not getting the same thing. It is multi-POV, so every chapter is a different character's point of view. Yeah, it's really quite interesting. I'm actually reading the sequel right now. It's a duology, and I'm enjoying it thus far. There's alliances, betrayals, there's, the inner workings of the city itself are involved. Spell makers sponsor certain champions, so they'll provide spell rings to them for the tournament. And it is a fight to the death. I don't know if I mentioned that. They do have to kill each other. So, high stakes here, but really enjoyable. I recommend checking it out if you're a fan of magic and of I was gonna say morally great characters, but some of them, some characters here truly believe they're the heroes and will do anything, absolutely anything to, achieve those goals. And some are raised to be absolute little monsters, like truly no morality monsters. So really interesting dynamics with that. I recommend. Okay. After all of us villains, we get to, I think, my first 5-star read of the year, and that's The Ministry of Time by Callian Bradley. An excellent novel. I think this was one that I'd seen on shelves, and a friend of mine picked it up, and I knew that she loved it. And then more recently after that, I was seeing a lot of praise for it online. I just see it everywhere and be like, oh, I recall seeing that on the shelves. And then another friend of mine, I think she had read it or was going to read it. She had it on hold at the library. Not long after, I picked it up because I'd heard so much praise for it, and it is absolutely excellent. So I'm not usually I can't really, are these called deckled edges? I don't recall. Anyway, not always a fan of this type of paperback or book of any sort with the raw edge paper. But I will say this cover, it has a slight embossed effect, which I enjoy. Anyway, it's a difficult book to describe in a lot of ways, but essentially it is a science fiction story in which there is a new British ministry of time. In this case, so it's a highly classified ministry in which they've discovered time travel, and so as part of their experiments and investigation, they're bringing back specific historical figures but usually people who have already died in their original timeline. So they're not changing, they didn't do something great at a certain point in time. They're taking them at the point of death when they would have otherwise died, bringing them to the present, and just investigating the effects of time travel and everything on them, and acclimating them to the present time frame, which is really interesting. So as part of that, they live with, and I can't remember the name, I think a bridge, someone to bridge them from their time to the present. So it's like a live-in roommate, but they're also like an employee, like their handler. So messy relationship dynamics at play here, and I'll leave it at that because I don't want to get too much farther into that. But an excellent read. Could not put it down. I think I read it in maybe 2 sittings because I wanted to know what would happen. An excellent read. It sticks with you. So that was the 3rd book I read this year. And then I can't remember why. I think I was reorganizing my books, or I was seeing stuff online. I was like, you know what? I want to reread Book Lovers. I adored this when it came out. A friend of mine gave it to me for my birthday. It was actually the first Emily Henry that I read, and she loved it. She gave it to me. I read it in a day because Emily Henry's got the juice. She knows exactly how to hook me and keep me in a story. So, I hadn't read it since then. That was maybe 2 years ago, I think. And I just picked it up, and I was like, I'll just start a little bit of it. And again, she had me hooked once more. So this was my sort of on the side read. I read a chapter or so every night before bed, in between other books or in addition to other books I was reading, just as a little like a palate cleanser, something just nice and light and easy. And I love these characters. It gets me every time. So I'll read the blurb just so, in case you haven't read it and you want to know what's up. Nora Stevens' life is books. She's read them all, and she's not that type of heroine. Not the plucky one, not the laid-back dream girl, and especially not the sweetheart. In fact, the only people Nora is a heroine for are her clients, for whom she lands enormous deals as a cutthroat literary agent, and her beloved little sister Libby. Which is why she agrees to go to Sunshine Falls, North Carolina for the month of August when Libby begs her for her sister's trip away, with visions of small-town transformation for Nora, who she's convinced needs to become the heroine of Nora in her own story. But instead of picnics in meadows or run-ins with the handsome country doctor or bulging foreign bartender, Nora keeps bumping into Charlie Lastra, a bookish, brooding editor from back in the city. It would be a meet-cute, if not for the fact that they've met many times and it's never been cute. If Nora knows she's not an ideal heroine, Charlie knows he's nobody's hero. But as they are thrown together again and again in a series of coincidences no editor worth their salt would allow, what they discover might just unravel the carefully crafted stories they've written about themselves. So, she's a book agent, Charlie's an editor. They have one kind of terrible meeting that sets the course of their relationship, thus going forward, like their professional relationship. They know each other. They're in the industry together. They don't get along. She's a ruthless shark, and he's a cutthroat editor. And she is hard in order to protect her clients, and she thinks he's just a dick. But in a way that, like, he's not literally that mean. Like, they just kind of butt heads. It's not the type where it's, like, clearly he's actually, like, a shitty person. No, they're just, in that professional atmosphere, they're button heads. They don't get along. But then there's a forced proximity when they're both in this small town for the summer. It's a delight. It's a delight in every way. And I really, really recommend, if you like, just honestly, if you want a good romance, Book Lovers delivers. I love the characters. It just hits, She's precious to me. Okay. Following that, I read Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reed. Also, I love this cover, this illustration. I don't know, like the little snake eating the mouse. She's holding on to it. I just think it's a beautiful cover. So this is like a Russian folklore inspired story, which I really love, and the way it's woven into it. So our main character here, whose name I don't recall, it's been a little while, Marlinchin. Marlinchin. She, her father is like the last wizard in their city. It's sort of a magic is being pushed out by industrialization kind of vibe, and he is a terrible, abusive man. It's awful. Like it's not too overt, but it's not good either. Like it's hard to describe exactly. He's abusive in small ways, not in blatant violence or anything like that, but he's abusive. Um, and she has been, grown up and fed on fairy tales, and so her only understanding of the world is through fairy tale, which is really really interesting. And he basically keeps her and her sisters locked away in their house. They're not allowed to leave because he doesn't trust, the outside world. But they sneak out, and she meets a beautiful ballet dancer, and they form a connection. But she has her own demons to deal with from her family life and that trauma. And it's a really, really interesting read. It's just beautifully written. I love anytime a book reads like a modern fairy tale in the way that like it's a little dark and gruesome, but even the language, the way it's written, is so beautiful, if that makes sense. That's my ideal book, honestly. Yeah, a lot of it's just a beautiful story, and I love the characters. Love Marlinchin. Just a really good read. I highly recommend if you like a fairy tale, like a darker fairy tale. An excellent read. Okay. So now we get to, here, I'll pull up my iPad. So now we get to the first audiobook that I read, which was, just make sure nothing crazy's on here. Hold on. Yes. Men Have Called Her Crazy. So this is Anna Marie Tendler's audiobook. So Anna Marie Tendler, she is like an artist, she's a photographer, and she was married to John Mulaney for a number of years. I know that's when I really really discovered who she was after they separated. But yeah, her audiobook, her memoir, talks about her sort of two timelines unfold every other chapter. So you get a story from her childhood or young adulthood or just her past generally, alongside a chapter about her time in a rehabilitation facility for her eating disorders, amongst other mental health problems. Really interesting exploration of sort of her past traumas, but also some past joys, and her current, how she was dealing with that with her crisis. She has a really interesting voice. She also, I mean, literally her voice as well as her writing voice, because she did narrate the audiobook as well. So just really interesting to hear in her words her experience. I know she came under a lot of criticism because people felt that she was using her sort of newfound notoriety to promote this book as if it would talk about her relationship with John Mulaney and their marriage, which it does not. It maybe there's some not necessarily even overt references to it, but like asides that you can understand if you know that she's likely talking about John or their relationship. But I didn't like go, and I have the benefit of knowing that because I'd heard all this, that I know it's not about that. So, but I was still interested. I'd heard good things otherwise from people I know who had read it, so, or even listened to it, I think. It does get like, so it's called Men Have Called Her Crazy. and there is a lot of, and to a degree I understand, the misandry, if you want to call it that. Like she has had past and ongoing issues with men. Totally fair. Not a huge fan of them either. Um, but sometimes that colors what she's talking about to a degree. Especially at the end, there was a point where just what she was saying was like, okay, I feel like you're, I don't know, reaching. I don't know. So I don't know, go into it with that in mind if you'd be interested in that book. But beyond that, still really interesting to hear from, you know, just her perspective on what's happened to her and in her life, and interesting. She's an interesting woman, so I enjoyed it. What was after that? Let's take a look. Let's look together. So, followed that up with another audiobook. So for me, I can't, and I've tried somewhat, I can't listen to fiction audiobooks. I can listen to memoirs. And that is what I've done this far this year. All audiobooks I've read are memoirs. So the next one that I read was Carrie Fisher's Wishful Drinking. So I believe this was the first of her memoirs. If you're not familiar, Carrie Fisher was a great actress. She was also a writer, not just of this, but of, you know, she would do script doctoring and come in to do, you know, ghostwriting on some scripts. There's a word, I think script doctoring is what it's called when you come in to write or rewrite parts. Anyway, she was a very interesting woman. So she's best known for playing Princess Leia. She's also very well known for being Debbie Reynolds and Eddie Fisher's daughter. So she's grown up in Hollywood and in the spotlight her whole life. And so it's just very interesting to hear in her own words little stories, little tidbits of her life. So this was based on a one-woman show that she had done on stage. It's a written version of it. So it's really like tightly put together, really really good. I really enjoyed it. You know, she from a fairly young age. I don't know if like she started like drinking, doing drugs at a young age. Struggled with that later on in life and throughout her life. So she's very candid. She's very funny. She's so incredibly smart. Her writing, she has just such a specific voice that, like, so a little while ago I also watched Postcards from the Edge, which is a film based on a novel she wrote that is also heavily inspired by her life. And watching the movie and hearing the dialogue, you just can identify. You're like, oh, Carrie Fisher wrote this. I can hear it, like the way the characters speak, especially the main character, who's very clearly based on her to a degree, speaks just like she does in this. Like the clever little quips, just the I don't know, something about it. She's so distinct. So yeah, really really interesting memoir. Really interesting to hear, and her narration, of course, adds so much of her personality to those words. Yeah, she's just such an interesting person. Really enjoyed that one. I help if my iPad was not upside down. What else did we have? Oopsies. Let's take a look. What did I read following that? Okay. So, following Wishful Drinking, I read Plain Bad Heroines by Emily M. Danforth. So this one, she's a tome. she's hefty, and she's been through some things now. I started reading this a while ago. I don't remember how long ago exactly. Maybe 2023. Maybe. Anyway, this is one of those books that, and I've had a couple in my time, that I will start and stop over and over until I just finish it. And I kind of knew from the outset that this is going to be one of those. But that being said, I never felt like I didn't retain everything, you know. For the most part, like, and, you know, I would read for, it wasn't like I'd read a chapter every few months. It was like I would read a chunk and then take a break, read something else, go back to it eventually, and then read a chunk. It had been so long though that more recently I was like, okay, I'm gonna bite the bullet. I'm gonna actually make time for her, dedicate some of my time to get it done. So I can actually see where my bookmarks rested for extended periods of time. So I know that essentially, I can see where the line is. Essentially, this much of it, which is about 300 pages, I read in a very short amount of time because I just wanted to eat it up. I wanted to get it done, you know. And maybe I've talked about this book before. I'm not sure. I've definitely described it many times. But it's essentially about two different timelines happening at a all-girls school in 1902. And I don't remember what state. Like a northeastern state, probably, of the United States. Essentially, so in the past, these girls at this all-girls school form a little club called the Plain Bad Heroine Society. And it's a very queer novel, I'll say off the bat. These girls are inspired by a book, like a memoir written by a young girl their age from their area, to form this group and sort of not conform to what society wants them to be. You know, it wants them to be pleasant young girls getting their education, but they all are just so gay they can't do that. At least two of those girls. They form a very close relationship and are basically chased out of the school by one of the girls' cousins, and they both die. These girls die at this school. It's very tragic. And so then it also follows the headmistress of that school and her own close girl, gal pal, and the aftermath of what happens at Brookance, the school, Brookance, the aftermath of those girls' death and how it affects them and other spooky happenings. Is the school cursed? Is there a curse? Who's to say? But then about like 100 years later, the hauntings and happenings and the history of this school have been written as a book and is now being adapted into a movie. And so we get dual timelines of, you know, the 1900s and then present day with the production of the movie. And the spooky haunting happenings of the past start to bleed into the present. And you kind of get this interesting, sort of not quite horror. There's some unsettling, unnerving things, but just sort of general spookiness. And I will say it's dense. After having finished it, it's there's a lot happening in here. A lot of it is sort of, there's a lot of backstory to backstory to backstory. You know, we're getting a lot of detail. Once the film production actually starts, it amps up a bit more, but there's still a lot of past still happening to a detailed degree that's a little slow. I won't lie. It's not a fast read. The pacing is quite slow. Still enjoyable. Still, I think, worth checking out if that sounds at all interesting to you. Maybe you'll read it faster than I did. It took me like 2 years, but it's still a really interesting story, interesting characters. You know, even, and also, like, for me, the ending was, I want to say if it's satisfying or not. I was still left with questions, which, you know, after 600 and what, like 30 pages is maybe a little bit, not disappointing, but it did feel like, oh, even after all that, I don't really know. But I still enjoyed it. It was still a very good read, but that'd be my caveat. So, Plain Bad Heroines ends by Emily M. Danvers. forth. Okay. And then following that, I read Carrie Fisher's second memoir called Shockaholic. So Carrie Fisher, as part of, so she had bipolar disorder, and as part of her treatment, in addition to that, I think also in addition to her, her substance abuse problems, she found that electric shock therapy, which has a more medical term that I can't remember now, EMDR or EDR, something like that. But that was a therapy she used to help treat her bipolar and other mental health problems. And so as a result of that, she had some like amnesia symptoms associated with that. So I think it was partly to do with they'd administer, what's it called? The drug you get to put you to sleep for surgeries. I think she got like a small dose of that to make the shock therapy less seizure inducing, something like that. But anyway, as a result of that, it would cause memory loss, like short-term memory loss, around like right before she get the treatment and up to a few days after. She would just not have her short-term memory, which meant she couldn't really make new memories in that time frame around it. So a lot of this is sort of her reflecting on memory to a degree. She's telling she's telling stories from further back in her lifetime. Some of them sort of overlap and weave into stories she had told in her previous memoir. I'd say this one felt a little less focused than that first one, than Wishful Drinking. Still very, that same funny, witty tone, the same really interesting stories from her time in Hollywood, from her childhood, just generally from her life. Not always happy, but she I think this is a quote she'd even said in one of her memoirs. Oh my gosh, I'm gonna ruin it because I don't remember how it actually goes. If I didn't like laugh at my own life, then it would just be sad, like that kind of thing. Like she definitely laughs at her own tragedies, and she's I don't know. She was just so full of life. She was wonderful. But yeah, my only complaint of this memoir was just a little less focused, just sort of various stories strung together. Her other one felt more like there was a bit of a through line. This one, it felt just like story. So it didn't really end in a way that was like, oh, yeah. It was a very good ending still, like very poignant, very personal to her, but it didn't feel like I started at point A and got to a point B. It just felt like all the points side by side. Anyway, still a very, very good memoir. Definitely recommend the audiobooks of her memoirs, because I could read any of her memoirs but not hear it in her voice the same way. Like, she's one of a kind. Okay. And then after Shockaholic, I read an ebook. I read Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins. So this is the newest Hunger Games prequel. It comes after Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes and before the Hunger Games trilogy, if you're not familiar. I thought it was excellent. I really, really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed hearing Haymitch's story. I will say I liked Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes more. I felt like there was more to chew on with Snow's point of view than with Haymitch's. And maybe that's just the nature of the characters and what was going on for either character at those times in their lives. That's just my opinion. But still, the same, relevant and prescient points that Miss Suzanne Collins has made before. She said, I'm gonna keep saying it. Keep saying it till everyone knows and understands and listens. Yeah, they're just so good. The political commentary, the characters, what's going on. Sorry, years of silence. I really enjoy her books. It makes me really want to revisit the Hunger Games trilogy. I read it so long ago, and I never owned the whole series. I owned the first one, but I think I only read the whole series once in like high school. So I think that's one I'll need to revisit soon. Yeah, really enjoyed Haymitch's story. Um, I'd say the only thing was it felt a little, when they bring characters from the original series back to a prequel and go, oh, this is where it all started. Like we get it's sort of a weird like, and they all knew each other. It was all so convenient. Like it just felt like that. Um, but it also contributed to the way it mirrored Catching Fire, and it mirrored those two stories in a really important way of like, you know, Katniss was not the first to try. It was not like, oh, yeah, we waited, what was it, like, how many years was it? Like 49 years for anybody to try and rebel and do something. No, like, um, it didn't only start with Lucy Gray, and it didn't only start with Haymitch. Like, it's been an ongoing thing for tributes or for whomever in these districts to try and overthrow these games. Um, so in that sense, really, it's not like a complete like convenience of the writing. It's true to what's happened, but it just felt like, oh, this character's here. Oh no, wait, this character's here. Like that sort of contrivance. But it was still really enjoyable and still a really good read. And then the most recent book I read, another audiobook. This one was Yearbook by Seth Rogen. So this is his memoir. And that was pretty good. That was neat. Interesting to sort of hear more about his childhood, what he did, growing up in Vancouver. The audiobook's really interesting because he has, um, you know, in the book, I guess he's written out some conversations. So there's dialogue of like, this person said this, I said this, they said this, what have you. And in the audiobook, he has sometimes those actual people narrating their own lines. And sometimes he has like actors or other people he knows narrating lines of other people as if they're like characters. So, like I think at one point I heard Jason Segel's voice narrating like a drug dealer or something. Like just these little like it's sort of audio performance, like it sort of, yeah, it was interesting. I thought it added to I don't know, the immersion of it. Like when he's retelling a story, sometimes you actually get other voices as the other people. So I thought that was neat. It was very much in his voice, though, like the writing, which is interesting. Especially, it's funny for any story he's retelling when he was a kid. There's like a young voice actor doing his lines. So it's funny to hear a child, and he's not doing like a Seth Rogen impression. He's just some kid, but reading what Seth has written. It's very Seth Rogen writing, which is kind of funny. But yeah, he had some interesting stories. Honestly, he talked just mostly a lot about doing drugs. Just a lot about various experiences doing different drugs, which, I mean, that's true to his life, so it was interesting. Yeah, I think it was neat. There was no real through line, again, with that one, was my only complaint, probably. But it was still interesting to listen to. So that concludes everything that I've read thus far. We can take a look, a little scroll through my Goodreads here. So there they all are, and look at my ratings there if you're curious at all. Honestly, fairly successful this year so far with what I've been reading, like how much I've enjoyed it. So it's always nice to not have to slog through a book you're not enjoying, or to read something that you're excited about turns out to not be so good. So I've been picking good ones thus far. So that brings my total this year. Let's take a look at what Goodreads has to say. Where do you find that information? My goodness. You know what? Let's just count. We'll just count together. Let's get the red shelf. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Whoopsies. 11. So I'm at 11 for the year so far. I have no shortage of books to read. Many at my disposal. Many physical copies, many ebooks on Libby, a couple audiobooks on Libby as well. So I'll be keeping busy. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you